Hey guys, David here, and today we are going to be covering a really quick tutorial on the HFR, the high frame rate ultra slow-mo mode of the Sony ZV1. These shots can really add an element of interest, uniqueness and production value to your edits. I'm going to show you the settings you need to know, a quick demonstration, and then 5 practical tips to get the best out of this mode and the most interesting and cool shots. What kind of shots? Check out this test footage. To set up HFR recording, we want to first press the menu button on our ZV1 and then navigate to the second menu tab, Movie. At the bottom of the first page of that tab, you're going to see HFR settings, one item from the last. We then have 4 options. Record setting lets you choose the output frame rate for your slow-mo, 24, 30 or 60 frames per second. You're normally going to want to match this to whatever your wider project is going to be. If you don't have a specific choice, then the relationship is basically the lower the frame rate, the more extreme the slow motion. Right now, I have the camera set to NTSC mode so that I can shoot in 24 frames per second, but on screen I've got the PAL equivalent frame rates, as well as an illustration of how many times slower than reality these shots will be, depending on the settings that you choose. Back to the HFR menu, and the second option is frame rate. This is where you are choosing the recording frame rate. So the higher this frame rate, the more extreme and slower the slow motion will be. The third option on our menu is the priority setting. We can choose either quality or shoot time priority. Personally, given that these shots are already going to massively slow down real life, I would always suggest you stick with the quality priority. The fourth and final setting on our menu is record timing. This determines how the camera responds when you try to shoot. So the easiest to understand is start trigger. This is what I use most often. You press the trigger, the camera starts recording, and it continues until you press it again, or it's shot the maximum length. Shooting time in these modes is usually a couple of seconds. The next option is end trigger. This sets the camera so that when you press that shoot button, it will actually have recorded the previous couple of seconds before you pressed it. This can be quite helpful for capturing things that only happen once, so you can press the button immediately after that event has happened, but I personally find it quite counterintuitive in other situations. End trigger half works identically, except where end trigger will take the maximum video size prior to you pressing the button. End trigger half will take half of that video size. Section 2, we're now going to look at a quick demo of how to do a shot using HFR mode. This will just be pouring some water. We all know how that moves in real time, so it's a very easy thing to be able to see the illustration of ultra slow motion. First, we need to exit that menu by pressing the menu button and then press the mode button on the top of the camera and navigate to HFR mode, then select it. Now we need to set the parameters for our shot. The ISO, the shutter speed, and the focus primarily. Once you're happy with all of those parameters, press the center confirm button on the camera and you will enter shooting standby mode. Once you enter standby mode, the focus of the camera and all the other parameters are locked. If you're ready to shoot, you just shoot with the movie button like usual. If you need to change any of those things, press the confirm button again and you'll be able to change those parameters. Press confirm again to go back to standby mode. With everything set up and the camera in standby mode, I'm now going to press the movie button to do my shot. And if I'm doing any camera movement, like in the example here, I'll do that while the camera is shooting. HFR mode usually gives you approximately 2 or 3 seconds of shooting time, so any movements that you do will need to be fairly quick, and they can be quite large because the image will be slowed down so much, any shakiness will really be softened in the final output. Before we get to the final section on some practical tips, if any of this has been useful or interesting, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It would really help me out. Thank you. So, section 3, practical tips. I've got 5 of these to take you through. Tip 1. If you can, try to keep your ISO as low as possible and use additional light sources to compensate for having to use a high shutter speed for these modes. You can boost the ISO if you've got no other choice, but I think in these modes, noise becomes more noticeable, and especially above ISO 3200 or so, it can get to the point where shots are more difficult to use or need more work in post. Number 2, shutter speed. You might be familiar with the 180-degree shutter rule, which normally for video means if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, for instance, you would shoot at 1 over double the frame rate. So 24, you shoot at 1 over 48 shutter. 60, you shoot at 1 over 120 shutter. My tip here is to ignore that 180-degree shutter rule. That is about trying to replicate the type of motion blur that we're used to seeing in movies and cinematic footage. Things are so slowed down by the HFR mode, you're not going to really be getting any motion blur anyway. So in this scenario, I don't really notice any benefit to following the 180-degree shutter rule, but I do notice getting more light into the camera as a significant benefit from shooting at the slowest shutter speed I can. That means I don't have to boost ISO, that means I can get less noise in my shots. Tip number 3 is around 960 or 1000 frame per second mode. Basically, it's to not put too much reliance on it. It crops in the image significantly compared to the slower HFR speeds, and it also noticeably increases noise and reduces quality. Tip number 4 is around movement and focus. Because the focus of the camera gets locked when you enter shooting standby mode, this means that you should bear that in mind if you're doing any movement in your shot. If you're trying to do a panning shot, for instance, try and keep your camera at a fairly constant distance away from the object. If you want to have a cool shot which begins, has a middle part or an end part in focus and the rest of the shot is blurry for whatever reason, then set that focus to the point that you want it to be in the shot and then build your camera movement around that for optimal results. And finally, tip number 5, I recommend setting the HFR frame rate selection choice as a shortcut within the function menu on your ZV1. If you don't know how to do that, then feel free to ask me in the comments, and if you'd find other sort of productivity and menu hacks for the camera useful, let me know and I'll look at making a video. That's all for today. Massive thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. If that was helpful or interesting, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We've got more ZV1 content, as well as things on videography, music, and tech that you may well enjoy. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take it easy.